Welcome to the Stat AI podcast.
Welcome to the future of emergency medicine, a realm where artificial intelligence isn't just a buzzword, but a beacon of hope and a tool for transformation. I'm DJ Apakama. My co-host Ethan Abbott and I are both emergency physicians, and we have witnessed firsthand the burgeoning role of AI in our field. Our everyday experience grappling with healthcare disparities and social challenges have led us to a pivotal question. In the wave of AI applications, what changes are coming to emergency medicine, and will they be for the better? This podcast was born not just to ask these critical questions, but to seek out answers from the experts, to understand and to demystify the potential of AI in emergency medicine. We believe in bringing this conversation to the wider community to embrace AI as a tool for positive change. This podcast is our exploration of that future, a journey we invite you to join. So let's embark on this path together to learn, to question, and to envision a new era of emergency medicine enhanced by the power of AI.
Hey, DJ, what's going on?
Hey, man, how you doing?
I'm so excited for episode 2 of our podcast. Today we have Dr. Ben Glicksberg, who is going to be joining us to talk a little bit more about the intersection of AI and emergency medicine and large language models and all that kind of cool stuff. I wanted to mention to you, I just ran across a really interesting article in the Times that was looking at recruiting people from academia into tech, kind of similar to Ben's career transition recently. And I thought it was super interesting.
I did see that, actually.
You did? Yeah, what'd you think? Yeah.
I guess it's from the times, so it's a sign of the times, isn't it? The lines between academia and tech are really just getting very blurry. And I think nowhere is that kind of more prominent than AI in healthcare. There's a huge draw towards the tech sector, and, they have a lot of deep pockets, and we're going to need resources to solve a lot of these problems ahead. So I think it's definitely something to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's sort of signifies this tug of war between academia and tech, and I think the article also sort of highlighted that maybe 20 years ago, if you left academia and went to tech, that was sort of like you're sort of a downgrade. But I think now, as we know that tech is and industry, I should say, is providing real opportunities for researchers in academia to advance their careers and to work outside of sort of the traditional box of academics and the quote ivory tower.
I mean, that's a great point, right? Particularly in healthcare, this dynamic could redefine how we approach medical research and innovation. But it kind of makes me wonder. Sure, it makes you wonder. Are we heading towards a future where the top scientific minds are more likely to be in Silicon Valley than they are at a research center at a university?
Yeah, I think that's kind of where the article was sort of, was going. And I think that's a really important question. And I think that does highlight and kind of bring us to our guest today, Dr. Ben Glicksberg, who you have, worked with a little more directly in the past on some research. I've sort of met in passing before, and just really excited to learn about what he's up to and all of his new work within industry, and talk about some of his older projects and research that we're both familiar with.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Ben. He's not a physician, but he does so much research in the clinical realm, and a lot of his recent papers have actually been in emergency medicine. Which I think he's really got a unique viewpoint on where we've been and where we're going. So I'm sure he'll speak to it a little bit more, but, what I'm really most kind of interested in is what implications does this have for the future of healthcare?
Yeah, totally agree. I think this is going to be an amazing conversation. So let's get started.
All right. Well, I'm just going to jump in here. I am so excited today. We have one of my favorite all-time researchers joining us. Ben Glicksberg is a PhD and VP, as well as head of data sciences and machine learning at Character Biosciences. Character Biosciences is a patient-driven therapeutics company that uses genomics, longitudinal clinical and imaging data, as well as machine learning and novel experimental approaches to identify molecular drivers of disease progression and develop innovative targeted medicines. He completed his PhD in neuroscience at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in 2017, and postdoctoral work at the University of California, San Francisco in 2019. Previously, he was a tenure-track faculty at Mount Sinai, which is where we met, and we are so excited to have you here today, Ben. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and Ethan and DJ. Been really looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Ben.
So, I think one of the first questions, given that intro that we just gave, that we have to ask really is, if you could just tell us about your academic background and training and what made you interested in your current fields.
Yeah, funnily enough, I actually didn't start my academic career out as a data junkie. I was originally involved in behavioral animal neuroscience research, and that's what I applied for a PhD for, when I just so happened to hear a seminar on the power of data-driven precision medicine. I was blown away. How these computational tech methods that I never really heard of before could synthesize vast quantities of data, disparate biomedical data, and really distill them into insights. I had no real computer science background. I dove into the deep end of biomedical informatics in the first year of my PhD, which I recognize is quite a rare and special opportunity. So kudos to the program and my advisors for allowing this. I'll admit that at first 6 to 12 months of starting, I was pretty useless. I had to learn Python, I had to learn R, MySQL from scratch. Somehow I stumbled through it, and for the next couple of years, was able to do research with a really amazing and valuable, unique clinical genomic data set, which really set the stage for everything I do now. As a quick side note to folks earlier in their academic career without programming experience, I think nowadays it's much, much easier to self-learn. There are a bunch of amazing free resources that are online classes. Some of these are actually interactive lessons where you can try things out for programming and machine learning. And many institutions are offering and providing more and more classes for such. Briefly, though, for my own thesis research, it was really revolved around building large-scale, at the time, networks of disease trajectories and seeing how genomics may play a role in the longitudinal advancement of disease. I then was fortunate to start a postdoc at UCSF and continued to focus on using machine learning on these large-scale retrospective patient data from EHR, and really thinking a lot about generalizability, extensibility of models, regulation of models, implementation of models. And after that invaluable experience, I came back to Sinai to start a tenure-track faculty position and built a lab around multimodal machine learning of patient data, really focusing on how we can integrate the many forms of health data that you docs capture, integrating things like text, waveforms, images, structured data into predictive modeling and drug discovery, which hopefully can overcome some of the limitations that I'm sure we'll talk about of each modality independently. I had a blast in this role and super grateful for the fantastic scientists in my group that really did all the work. After a few years of this, however, I was really provided with a unique opportunity at a startup, focusing on the immediate translation of some of what I've been working on throughout my entire academic career. And I transitioned into the leadership role at Character Biosciences, and we're actively developing novel therapeutics based on personalized medicine principles for longitudinal diseases that are particularly hard to research.
That's amazing, Ben. Thanks so much for that great introduction. I think DJ and I are not only fascinated with both your career accomplishments so far, but also your transition to industry from the academic world. I wonder if you just for a few minutes could sort of talk about that transition, what it's been like for you, and sort of the hurdles you may have had to overcome to transition from the academic world into working within a company. I recently heard an interview with a academic researcher who had transitioned to industry and described it as different, not only in the sort of daily activities, but also the timelines. For example, he was describing taking 8 years to publish a paper, which would be sort of unacceptable in the industry world. So I wonder if you could sort of comment about that sort of transition as well in terms of expectations and things like that.
Yeah. Very different fields and areas, but really we're in a brave new world in the best way possible. I'm sure equally as well that traditionally there have been these huge divides, right? These huge walls between the ivory tower of academia and industry. It's becoming increasingly clear that this divide isn't ideal. It's not the ideal way of doing things. And in the past decade, there's been more of a refreshing blend that's been happening. Academia and industry, either large biotech, pharma, startups, you name it, which all have their own benefits and weaknesses, have really come together. You mentioned, in academia, you can deeply study a problem for 8 years and beyond. You can iterate on it. You can fully flesh it out into these landmark, amazing studies. There's time. You don't have to worry about keeping the lights on. Of course, that is if you're grant funded. You can get access to interact with patient data safely with IRB oversight. You can have clinical trials that are implemented. You're really in the thick of it. Of course, there are barriers, right? I'm sure I know you've experienced these. I certainly experienced these. There are silos that unfortunately exist that make translation of science into the clinic a bit more infrastructurally challenging. This process also requires a huge amount of capital that, a young, a pre-tenure faculty member like myself didn't quite have access to. You also mentioned 8 years versus 8 days. Startups are definitely more agile on one hand. The silos are torn down, really because the research is benefiting the company overall. It's not a single PI. What drew me to this startup was really to get this firsthand experience on trying to actually translate findings from, many of the stuff that I've been working on and employing, and into really translating the discovery of a new potential target into something that actually could be developed, which was, blew my mind. This wasn't possible, at least for me, in academia, at least in the short term. Of course, startups have their own challenges, right? Most of it revolving around funding and survival, but definitely refreshing to get experience on the other side of health research. I also just want to highlight here that the worlds are colliding in a good way. There's increasing collaboration between companies, startups, academia, which is propelling forward biomedical data science research and machine learning at a scale that is orders of magnitude better than, in isolation. Of course, there are concerns, issues surrounding these types of collaborations, but it's certainly an exciting time in biotech research across the board. Researchers, as long as you could ask important questions, analyze data robustly, there are so many avenues on how to do it. And I would actually absolutely recommend trainees to try to get experience in multiple realms, see what fits your style best. There's many more opportunities to do this. Perhaps try to get internships during graduate school, medical school. Pharma offers this, biotech offers this. We offer it in my small startup. Collaborate on an industry project. It's start your own company, spin off out of your lab work. There's so much flexibility and even from going back and forth. And if you're really lucky, in some ways, possible to have the best of all worlds.
I mean, that is kind of why we started this podcast, because I think there is definitely a nexus here of worlds that are coming together that we all, I think, agree. And have a real chance to make things much better for a broad swath of the population. And, I think a lot of that is obviously the data sets, people, but we're here to talk about AI. And I think it just behooves us to kind of have some sort of ground level understanding. And so for the non-experts among us, how would you define AI in the context of healthcare, and how has AI, especially in the healthcare space, advanced over the last 5 years?
Yeah, that's a great foundation to lay early on. AI in the context of healthcare is actually quite a broad spectrum, and really actually depends on your definition. So I'm glad we're doing this now. And depending on that definition, it actually has been around longer than most people think. If we consider part of the AI umbrella, under that umbrella, the ability to make inferences from data sets, then many of the clinical risk scores that you as ER docs actually employ have existed for decades, and were made using these principles with biostatistical techniques. Of course, the techniques have expanded from such things like linear regression, although that is still extremely valuable and well utilized, into more advanced ways of processing and understanding data at different scenarios, contexts, and scales. Simply put, building a model is something that'll never be perfect, but we can get closer and closer to those that are useful and work in the majority of situations. A lot of techniques, over the past decade and beyond, have been around addressing certain conditions of data sets, such as when you have small amounts of data, when you have imbalanced data, when you have data sets with too many parameters. And, things like SVMs and XGBoost have worked really well in these types of space. In the past, 10 plus years, what really took AI to the next level is really a confluence of hardware breakthroughs, and this is mostly revolving around GPUs, and the subsequent advancements in computational techniques that have been made possible, particularly deep learning. And deep learning actually has been around for decades, but it wasn't really able to reach its full potential without, some beefy hardware. Simply put, deep learning, different from the quote unquote shallow machine learning, allowed for processing of data on multiple layers that are translated and transformed into different representations of that data. That's really thought to mimic how humans process things within their brain. And deep learning really set the stage for impressive computer vision, and which of course naturally flows into healthcare. I mean, originally we were seeing computer vision being used to recognize numbers, digits from handwriting. And now we're talking about recognizing developmental disorders through facial movements. Now we're talking about identifying cancer from pathology slides. Really incredible. And, nowadays with large language models, especially ones that can handle multiple modalities of data, the frontier is being pushed every day.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ben. That's an amazing overview of how things have sort of evolved and transformed over the last several years. I wonder if you might just take a moment to talk a little bit about the intersection of emergency medicine and some of these algorithms that we've started to sort of discuss a little bit. I think within the emergency department, as you know, we operate within a somewhat fast-paced environment with sometimes limited data and often patients presenting with somewhat fragmented care. I wonder if you want to just comment about your research in this area, which has been extensive, and also some of the things that you see that can bridge some of these gaps and improve patient care overall.
Oh yeah. I mean, emergency medicine is such a great specialty for which AI can and hopefully will be supportive. Really the more data that are generated, particularly quantifiable data, are what models and myself like. When patients come to you in the ER, there's a lot of possibilities that you're considering, and you need to capture a lot of information quickly to make informed, triage decisions, patient histories, presentation symptoms, vital signs, lab test results, point of care testing, can not only be used by you, but also be used by models. This high density of information is so rare and valuable in the AI in healthcare space. Typically in other areas of medicine, as a data scientist, we're faced with missing this huge gaps of time between obtaining data and patient encounters, missingness of things that are just irregular. This is, of course, things have been developed to overcome these challenges, but the situation in the ER makes things a bit easier. Also, you have the ability to get data of different modalities. Electrocardiograms and scans taken like X-rays are also quantifiable sources of truth that models can ingest and utilize. Especially valuable when you also have corresponding, lab tests, results, vital signs to cross-reference. One last thing I'll mention is also the continuous nature of data that you get, right? The beds themselves, allow you to continuously monitor vital signs, key measurements like heart rate. Now, this is a bit harder for models to truly encapsulate, but this real-time continuous information can serve two functions. One, it can model deterioration in a data-driven fashion that is much harder to do when you have disconnected measurements. Secondly, it can allow for real-time alerts to you to prompt action. And this is, I think, a lot of the themes that we're going to talk about today. Of course, these alerts already exist, but from what I know, at least, they can be vastly improved. I could give one quick little thing about specifics. Just high level topics that I'm sure we'll flesh out later. When a patient comes in, I know it takes a lot of skill and experience to rapidly distill this information, as much surrounding context of the presentation that you can make inferences from, especially if you have their prior history and record. This is a lot of information. Of course, things can be missed, and I'm sure we'll talk about large language models. These are excellent at synthesizing and distilling long documented information quickly and effectively. Maybe they can be used to present relevant info to you to streamline the initiation of the care process. The other thing that I'll briefly mention and what I'm really stoked about is the evolution of digital health, biosensors, monitors, wearables, mobile app, anything that can provide objective data before they come in, before a patient presents to the ER, to give you information. How have they been sleeping? This type of context may help you make even more informed decisions.
So it sounds like, I feel like digital health, mHealth, it's gone through a couple of transitions in its branding.
Yeah.
But certainly kind of the influx of new data streams is exciting. And I suppose there's no more data stream that's kind of ripe for exploitation than the EHR. So how can some of the current AI approaches advance the current EHR landscape, both from the physician and patient side?
Yeah. I'm sure you both know better than me the issues with electronic health records. Before diving into these problems and areas of improvement, I do want to highlight and reinforce how invaluable they are for clinical informatics research. It's retrospective, real-world data that have essentially enabled the past decade of my own work. With that being said, the side you see in your role as the treating physician, the front end can obviously be better. These are still incredibly valuable and sophisticated softwares that can capture a lot of health and administrative data. But, let's say they're not as sleek and efficient as something like, Gmail. In the context of ER, I would say one of the most pressing issues from the physician side is the amount of time you have, and that time is extremely valuable, and you're thinking a lot of that into entering all the data. Not only is it distracting you from the care itself, sometimes with acute emergencies, time's of the essence. There's no way that you can accurately record everything that's happening to you while you're simultaneously, managing an active stroke.
Yeah.
Ben, can I have you tell my medical director that? Because I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Yes. And at the same time, you have to rapidly understand what's happening. Even if a patient's not just coming in, if you're starting a shift, a similar thing is happening, right? A lot of information, a data dump has to be done to you, and things can be missed. Let's continue to talk about what can be done on the physician side. We mentioned the potential large language models briefly. I want to reinforce this idea to synthesize and distill records for key points of information that are just acutely relevant. Another cool feature that may be exploited or that hopefully is being exploited more and more in the front end of VHR relates to natural language processing, but has recent boosts from LLMs, is the idea of autocomplete, autofill, which I'm sure we're intimately familiar with. I mean, when we type an address into our browser, suggestions pop up before we're finished. When we send a text message, next word or words suggestions are provided. This is something LLMs are great at, actually how they've been developed. Not only do they provide general recommendations, like that would fit most people, like after work, I want to go back to my family at, would suggest home. It would fit many people's response here, but also they can be personalized. It can learn from individual histories and preferences. After work, I want to go to the bar, or, this is the health podcast. So perhaps the gym. I think this principle can be extended to record entry in the EHR. Maybe LLMs can be co-pilots for you, helping you enter data quickly and more efficiently. Perhaps when certain symptoms are recorded, it can suggest a few typical follow-up plans, actions that you can choose from instead of typing from scratch. And I know part of this exists already, but maybe it can be done on a broader scale and more efficiently. We also briefly talked about digital health. There's concerns here, but, maybe if there's an audio capture device or video capture device that can capture this interaction, maybe the speech text function can provide automated transcription and distillation in the record. On the patient side, I'm going to hopefully be able to talk a lot about this, is around understanding and education. The ER can take quite a slew of conditions, and these are complex, not for you, but for, patients like myself. And these discharge instructions can be complicated, and even in a language that's not the patient's native tongue, which makes things even more complicated. The distillation of discharge summaries into simplified text and management plans is key. Of course, it'd be ideal if you could do that, but there's only so much time in the day, right? So, LLMs for kind of translation of complicated text into simplified terms, I think will be huge boons for both patient and provider.
Thanks so much for listening to the first half of our interview with Dr. Ben Glicksberg. Tune in next month for the second half, where we talk a little bit more deeply about large language models and some of the other research that Ben has been doing in the AI space. So tune in again next month. If you like the podcast, make sure you click and subscribe. And thanks so much for listening to the Stat AI podcast.
Please note that the views, opinions, and information expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily represent those of their employers, our sponsors, or any affiliated organizations. The content provided is for informational and educational purposes and is not intended as medical advice. We encourage you to consult with qualified healthcare professionals for any medical concerns or treatment decisions. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.